estudiantes que venís de otras zonas de España y de América Latina en este primer programa, de estudios de grado, aquí digamos de màsters. Sabéis que en Estados Unidos hablan de graduate programs, aquí hablamos en màsters y posgrado. Sed muy bienvenidos. En la primera fila tenemos aquí a los profesores, directores de grado. Ahora nos viene nuestra vicedecana de empresa, Carme, benvinguda. Carme, tens un lloc al costat del torrón. Benvinguda. You know, in Blanquerna we have about 6 graduate programs, officially graduate programs that perhaps if you want you can have doctorate programs, etc., etc. And we have a very large proposal on different areas of master and postgrau. It's very difficult to translate this in English, postgrau, in different areas, sports and communication, fashion and communication, management and protocol of events, several different programs. All of you are really welcome at the school. Tots sigueu molt benvinguts en aquests diferents màsters i postgraus de la facultat. Since some years, we have a main conference for the first day. We had several professors from all the world. And today we are very proud to have you here at the school having this main open speech at the school. We have with me Mara Einstein. Mara Einstein is now a professor of the Queens College of Cuny, City New York University, isn't it? Yes. Queens College. That means she is established in New York. That means something, New York.
Yes, most people know where New York is.
You know, it is not easy to survive in New York. Once at the dinner you explained to me how you survive in New York. It's not easy at all. She holds a PhD in media ecology from New York University, an MBA from the Kellogg Graduate School of Management, and a BFA of theater performance from Boston University. Her areas of research are very large and different. From media regulation, quite a very interesting area, but a few people knows about this area. I know, but a few people know. And to marketing, from consumer culture to religion, different areas that she is going to provide a more large vision of the situation of communication. A few people has this capacity to know different areas of communication. Dr. Einstein is recognized as a critic and authority on the cultural impact of marketing, as well as marketing, religion, and spirituality, from media regulation to spirituality, from culture consumer to other areas. And he has been quoted in numerous publications from the New York Times to the Los Angeles Times and Business Week. Dr. Einstein is the author of the most recently Black Ops Advertising, Native Ads, Content Marketing, and the Cover World in the Digital Cell. She has other books like Compassion, Inc., How Corporate Blurs in the Line Between What We Buy, Who We Are, and Those We Help, and different interesting book, one on media diversity, economics, ownership, and the FCC 2004, a very interesting themes about ownership in US. Her current research is a continuation of her work in consumer culture and the impact of marketing on society. Prior to join Queens College, Dr. Einstein held executive positions at NBC, MTV Networks, and major advertising agencies. That means that is a very interesting profile because she knows about university, she's PhD, but she also has contact with reality. And you know, from time to time, reality and university looks like two different walls. We try at the school to build bridges, and to know that without a strong knowledge of the reality, it's difficult to teach in undergraduate programs, but also more in graduate programs. Then you have these two sides of, two important sides in the knowledge of communication. She's going to talk to you, in English of course, about something that is very interesting, and I had some problems to understand, because you know I come from the philosophy, regulation. The issue is black ops advertising, I repeat, black ops advertising, branded content, media influencers, and the perils of covert marketing. Els perills d'un màrqueting amagat. Covert marketing, no? Could be like this. Well, Mara, thanks so much. She arrived just this morning from US, and I think you are going to survive having this magnificent speech to all of us. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
The floor is yours.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you all for coming out. I don't think I could have gotten this big a crowd at my own university, so thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And congratulations on the start of your new program. So I want to start off by showing you David Ogilvy. David Ogilvy is a long-time famous marketer. He started an advertising agency called Ogilvy and Mather in the middle of the last century. And what David Ogilvy said is, there's no need for advertisements to look like advertisements. If you make them look like editorial pages, you will attract 50% more readers, okay? And Jonah Peretti, who is the founder of BuzzFeed, said, when advertising is content, that's the future for publishers. Now, do you guys know who this guy is? You all know who John Oliver is? Well, the way that people really feel about advertising is pretty much the way that John Oliver summed it up, which is this. Ads are baked into content like chocolate chips into a cookie, except it more like raisins into the cookie because no one effing wants them there, okay? Nobody wants to see ads. Nobody's wanted to see ads in forever. And so it's started at the time of Ogilvy and continues. So I show this to demonstrate the idea that obscuring ads is not new. Advertisers have known for decades that viewers don't want to waste time engaging with a sales message. Audiences have come up with various methods to avoid ads, and advertisers have come up with ways to respond. In Ogilvy's days, the answer was the unique selling proposition, or the USP. Making commercials with a repetitive message that practically beat consumers into submission. Today, technology has enabled us to avoid advertising, first with a remote control, then DVRs, and now with ad blocking. Advertisers' response has been to find more surreptitious ways to put marketing messages in front of consumers and potential customers. This has been native advertising and content marketing, or more broadly, branded content. Now, I explored these in depth in my book, Black Ops Advertising, and if you want me to ask me during Q&A where that title came from, I can explain that. What I want to do today is first examine the phenomenon of covert advertising, then look at how branded content has evolved in the last year. Social media is integral to the dissemination of these sales messages, so we'll examine the continued use of influencers and the rise of influencer networks, companies that integrate individuals into more broadly disseminated branded content, all without consumers realizing they are engaging with social media affiliates and not individuals with personal, non-commercial perspectives. I do this with an eye toward highlighting the social consequences of these new sophisticated and deceptive marketing techniques. So first, let's talk a little bit about what is native advertising. Native advertising is advertising that has been created to be indigenous to the site within which it exists. It's supposed to look like everything else within the site. Now, I say site because a lot of this occurs in the digital space, but it's not just digital. It's also television and print as well. So this is from Facebook, and this is from Facebook on a laptop. So the only thing that tells you that this is something that is advertising is under where it says Airbnb, it says sponsored. But that's really the only thing that's highlighting you to the fact that this is advertising and not a post from your friend. What you also might want to look at is, I included in this a post from a friend right below that, and you look that right underneath that is 1 hour. It tells you when he posted it. Now, before Facebook started screwing with their algorithms, we never used to look at that line for when people posted, but now that we never know when Facebook's doing that, we look at it some more. But typically, that has been a space where we didn't look at what was going on. But more often than not, we're not looking at this on a desktop. We're looking at it on a mobile space. And so this is what native advertising looks like if you're looking at it from your phone. It's a much more squished space. It's something that tells you that your friends are also interested on it. The thumbs up is the thing that tells you that it's sponsored and you're looking for more information, conceivably. And again, the sponsored content. The same thing happens on Twitter. Now, also what's interesting on Twitter, it makes this look less like advertising than something that someone else posted, is they're posting an article from someone else, so it looks like it's something that somebody else is just posting for you. But again, instead what you see, instead of sponsored up at the top under the name, which is what you see on Facebook, you see promoted on the bottom on this site. So it's not the same on each of the sites, which is part of where the confusion comes from and people not understand when they're engaging with advertising content. More often than not, though, what you're seeing now online is video content. So when you see something like the one that I showed you just before, that's very rare, but it is native advertising. More and more native advertising on Twitter is video. But again, typically how we're interacting with this is on our phones and not on our desktop. And so it's a more squished space. And for any of you that are my age and your eyes are starting to go, it becomes harder and harder to be able to see this sort of content. This is from Instagram, and I put these two side by side because one is advertising and one is not. Really hard to tell the difference between which one is which. The one on the right, the one with the picture of the two women on there, underneath it says brought to you by Target. But the other one, but it would be really, particularly, and think about how you engage with this and how you are doing this when you're on your phone. You're going like this, and you're speeding through it, right? And then all of a sudden you click on something. And have you taken the time to figure out whether or not the thing you pushed on to interact with is in fact native? The reason why I spend a little extra time talking about the fact that we're engaging with this on natives is if you can look at over time, and you can't, I'm sorry that you can't see the dates down here, that ends in 2017, 2016, 2015. But you can see the green bar is how much time that Americans are spending in digital on mobile. So the time that we are spending online is moving more and more away from our desktop and moving more and more into the mobile space. And that will continue to happen. That continues to grow. I also wanted to show that this is not just a United States phenomenon in terms of how much time we spend online. The US, we spend about 6.5 hours a day online, and Spain is about 5 hours and 20 minutes, so you're not too far behind in terms of that. You're probably better off for spending less time. Now, what I was showing you up until now was what's known as in-feed native advertising. Where the growth in native advertising is occurring is in something known as custom native. And custom native is native advertising that's created by the publication to look very much like any other sort of content that appears on the site. So this is something that was from BuzzFeed, and BuzzFeed has really been the leader in terms of native advertising, and they have a lot of these, what they call listicles, right? And this is one that said 9 things that have changed in the last 20 years. And then you get to number 8, and it's about cell phones. And then what you don't realize until you get to the end of the list, that in fact this entire listicle was about selling cell phones. But by that point, you've already spent all sorts of time with this content. One of their most famous pieces of content was Dear Kitten. Has anybody seen Dear Kitten? Look for it. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. There's so much video content I could show you. I don't have time to show it to you, but go look up Dear Kitten. It's really adorable. And if you have cats, you'll love this. But what I want to highlight in this is Dear Kitten, and you can see here, is almost 3 minutes long. Typical ad is 30 seconds long, maybe 15 seconds long. 30 million people have engaged with this 3 minutes of content that is advertising. That's the kind of thing that advertisers can't pay for, right? If I said to you, I'm going to show you an ad and watch and sit down and watch it for 3 minutes, you would look at me like I had 3 heads, right? But what's happening is if you create content that is engaging enough for people to watch, they will do it of their own accord. This is another site called Great Big Story. Great Big Story is actually part of CNN. And CNN figured out that people that are your age weren't going to watch CNN, so they created a site that is disconnected from what it is that they do. And you wouldn't know unless you knew that, in fact, the site had anything to do with CNN. So they come up with very interesting things about hip-hop on point and so on. And these are videos you could go look at. But what they also do is they have these very eye-catching video content. Most of this, again, is video. 2 things to keep in mind, video and mobile, right? That's the direction all of these things are going. But if you see, this is sponsored by ANA. So there's just this quick little hint to you that there's an advertiser behind the content. And again, you're not seeing, by and large, you won't be seeing it by going to the website. You'll be seeing it because a friend sent it to you or a family member sent it to you in a social media space. So when you see about these bento boxes in the space, there's nothing on that that tells you that that is sponsored content. And again, here too, the whole idea that mobile video is where the direction that all of this is going. So what people will say to me, so what, Mara? This, a lot of this is really innocuous. I get to watch some really nice videos about cats. Who really cares? And to a certain extent, I would say, yes, that's probably true. But it's not just BuzzFeed that is creating this content. It's also publications like the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post. By and large, almost every major publication is using this sort of content. So this particular ad was the first piece of native advertising content that the New York Times ever did, and it was about women in prisons. And it was content that was actually promoted by Netflix to support the new season of Orange is the New Black. And I would say, yeah, that's really probably pretty interesting. It's probably content the New York Times never would have created if they hadn't had an advertiser behind it. But they also have content like this, and this is an ad that's brought to you by the Discover card. And the headline says, "College is still worth it despite rising costs." So I don't know what it's costing you to get your education here, but in the United States, the most expensive university right now is $75,000 a year. Yeah. That's more than most Americans make in a year. That's about 1/3 of the cost of a house for 1 year, okay? And so what this is promoting is the idea that a college education is very necessary, and because our government has been pulling out of supporting education, students have to bear the burden of paying for their college education. Even what government loans they can get, by and large, those aren't paying for most of their education, and so they're having to turn to places like banks and credit card companies to make up the difference. I assure you that Discover Card is not giving students a very good rate when it comes to the interest rates that they're borrowing their money against. So this sort of native advertising, by 2021, native display advertising revenue in the United States will make up 74% of display ads. That's up from 56% in 2016. So it's growing incredibly rapidly. The fastest growing is the custom native, so the listicles and the New York Times sort of thing. And 96% of social ad spending will be native. So most of what you're going to see when you go onto Facebook or Twitter or Instagram and so on is going to be the sort of native advertising. 90% of publishers use native, and 76% of B2C, that's business to consumer marketers, use content marketing. So this has pervaded the industry in a very short period of time. I also wanted to show that this is not just an American trend. This is something that is very pervasive in Spain. 80% of Spain's advertising agencies, professionals use branded content, and in 2018, 66% said that they expect to increase their use of this kind of advertising and marketing. Now, the issue is, as we're saying, is that consumers don't recognize when they're engaging with native advertising. What I found when I was doing the research for the book is if I asked people who worked in the industry, do people know if they're engaging with advertising? They're all like, yes, of course. Of course they are. Millennials are really smart. They're online. They know this stuff. Absolutely, they know when they're engaging with it. Well, that's what the industry says. That's not what academics say. In 2015, that was when the first research was done by Wojcinski and Evans out of the University of Georgia, and what they found was 17% of participants recognized native advertising. 17%. It's not a lot. The same research was replicated by Amazin and Mudaman from Boston University in 2017. Again, they found that 17% recognized native advertising. They could increase it to 27% if they primed them ahead of time to look for the fact that they might be engaging with advertising. And what people often say is, okay, so maybe older people don't recognize it and the numbers are skewed because of that. But in fact, no. Stanford University did a research study with middle school students and college students and found that 82% of middle school students, these are the digital natives, these are the people who have lived in the digital space their entire lives, could not distinguish between an ad and a news story. Now this has those of you who are studying journalism and advertising, this has all kinds of implications for what you will be doing as you move forward in your career, right? How are you going to be able to create content that is going to be understood as specifically editorial and not something that's trying to sell somebody something? Part of where the confusion comes from is who's creating the content. And who's creating content has been changing over time, and it's moving, I would say, in a more negative direction. What used to happen in magazines and newspapers and so on is there was what was known as the separation of church and state. And that was the case where the editorial side was on one side, the advertising side was on the other side, and never those two things should meet. And what is happening now is an increasing percentage of organizations are allowing their editorial teams to create the advertising content. And so that's what you're seeing in this first bar. So up just in a year, from 42% to 47%, the editorial team is responsible for creating the advertising as well. So think about this in your training as journalists. If you're being trained as a journalist, then you're going to be asked to then go create an ad. Imagine if you are working and you work in the environmental area, and suddenly Shell Oil comes to you and says they want to pay for a piece of content, and suddenly you have to write something for Shell Oil saying that they're a sustainable company. And that's not myth, that's not made up, that's something that the New York Times did. There's also the confusion because there's no uniformity in labeling. And this is what I was showing you in terms of sometimes it says sponsored, sometimes it says promoted, sometimes it says presented by. So overall, what we're seeing is these trends moving forward in these areas. So what I was showing you is some of what's going on now, but a lot of was going on up through about 2016. Seamlessly integrating digital and legacy media, continued increase in video over static content, and the death of the sales funnel. And what I mean about the sales funnel is the way that marketers think is in terms of a sales funnel of a lot of people up at the top. They're trying to find us as we're moving through the funnel to make our final decision, right? And get us at the point where we're ready to make a purchase. The sales funnel has all but disappeared, and the consumer decision process has been collapsed into a single step. So now what I want to do is look at some examples that demonstrate the evolution of branded content. Compared to a year ago, there's now a proliferation of branded content, both online and offline, and of course the offline examples are created with an online component attached. So how many people know Fearless Girl? Fearless Girl? Some people? Okay. This is a now famous Wall Street statue that was created by State Street Global Advertising. So this monument that is down by Wall Street in New York City, most people think of it as an empowerment symbol for women, and people from all around the world go down to Wall Street, have their picture taken with Fearless Girl, and in fact, it's a piece of advertising for a Wall Street firm. They created it to bring attention to the lack of women on corporate boards and to promote a new fund that invests in companies with more women in leadership. We could have a discussion about the use of a girl to represent women's empowerment, or the hypocrisy that State Street was forced to pay $5 million to settle a lawsuit for gender pay discrimination. But for the purposes of this talk, this is a prime example of branded content inserting itself into public spaces. In a related example, though less obscured, Delta Airlines produced a billboard on the side of a building in hipster Brooklyn, New York. And if you stand in front of it, it appears that you've traveled somewhere around the world, which is what I did for one of my wedding photos. That was me with my husband last year. And so it looks like we're in London, but in fact, we're not really. What my soon-to-be husband and I didn't know at the time was that it was also an ad for Tinder. Do you guys know Tinder? So what it says up there is world travelers are more likely to be swiped right. So here we are getting married in front of a Tinder ad, and we didn't know that that was going on. In the digital sphere, there are ads popping up in apps like Pocket. Pocket is an app where if you can't read an article right away or you want to save a piece of content, you stick it in your pocket. If you look in the middle, there's an AT&T ad in the midst of all of this other content, and that didn't used to appear. On Snapchat, you have Geofilters and sponsored lenses, and these are incredibly effective, right, because they're very brief. They don't interrupt you in your day. That's the other thing that advertisers talk about all the time, is they don't want to force you to stop doing whatever it is over the course of your day. Digital and legacy media are integrated into campaigns like Lady Gaga and the Intel Experience. And just like Fearless Girl, the objective of the campaign is generating significant earned media. Can I play the video on this, or do you have that?
Technology certainly matters to me. It has a really profound way that it can affect stage performance and take it to another level.
In 2015, Intel approached Lady Gaga and asked, "How would you use Intel technology in your performance?" Gaga responded on the biggest platform in music, and Intel became the first brand ever integrated into the Grammys. Intel technologists in House of Gaga teamed up 5 months before the show to develop ideas. They built a replica of the Grammy stage to create and test unprecedented technologies. With 1 month to go, the world lost music legend David Bowie. To honor his legacy, the team reconcepted the entire performance. Intel announced the program at the 2016 CES keynote with a 50-second video. This led into an integrated campaign with social, digital, PR, and TV content, including a 30-second teaser spot and a 90-second spot that ran immediately after the performance, giving attribution to Intel. This drove to a 7-minute film about the collaboration. The broadcast averaged 25 million viewers. Wearing a ring built on Intel technology, Gaga controlled the stage effects in real time. And through Intel-powered facial scanning and video projection, she paid homage to Bowie's iconic looks over the years.
This is ground control to Major Tom. You really made the grade.
The tribute was, by far, the most talked about moment of the night, with over 83 million social impressions, more than 10 billion media impressions globally, and the top social share of voice amongst promoted brands.
There is magic that can be made with technology. You can actually create imagery that is otherworldly, moments, events, experiences that have never happened before.
Intel inside, amazing experiences outside.
So you can see how integrated these kinds of campaigns are starting to be. It's about creating content in so-called legacy media like television and then moving it into the online platforms. So it engages us and brings us into the conversation. And what happens as we become the disseminators of this content is our friends and family are more likely to engage with it because we've sent it to them, right? It has the imprinter as if we have said, okay, this is something good and you should, in fact, spend time with it. One of the most elaborate integrated campaigns I found is that for MailChimp. MailChimp is a mail dissemination company. Playing off the idea that people could never get the name of the brand correct, Droga5 created 9 fake brands with names like Kale Limp, which is what you see on the left, and Male Crimp, meaning crimping men's hair, and produced ads, films to show online and at movie theaters, websites, Tumblrs, and even a hit song called Veil Him. So what's really smart about this is if somebody searched for one of these on Google, the site asked if you meant to look for MailChimp, which is an incredibly smart SEO strategy, right? So if you type in one of these, Google will automatically say, are you looking for MailChimp? It's really smart stuff. In sum, then, what we are seeing in the latest forms of branded content is a continued increase in video over static, created over complex executions that combine on and offline elements, and increasingly seamless integration of editorial and advertising content. So we've reached a point where it makes no sense to talk about a sales funnel. It no longer exists. Instead, the consumer decision process has been collapsed into a single step. To quote Mary Meeker's Internet Trends report, the content is becoming the store and the ad is becoming the transaction. So this is from Mary Meeker. If you don't know who Mary Meeker is, she's someone who, she's with a venture capital company, Kleiner Perkins, and she does this internet report every year. It's got usually about 300 slides in it. You can go online. They release it every year. It's some of the best content you will find about what's going on in the technology space out there. So word of mouth. I'm actually going to speed through this a little more quickly because I want to talk about influencers a bit more. But no, in terms of word of mouth, one of the key points in terms of the digital space is the idea of paid, owned, and earned media. Paid media is what we think of typically as paid for advertising. Owned media is a company's website. It can also be their Facebook page, their Twitter page, their Instagram page. And earned media is any media that they don't pay for, and that's the goal. The goal is to spend as little as possible on advertising. And what I argue, it's not the creation of the internet that led to the changes in advertising that we're seeing today. It is the rise of social media. Websites, blogs, commerce sites, and so on existed for years without creating the kind of advertising disruption that we are seeing now. It is not until we became part of the ecosystem to help disseminate these messages at extremely low cost did advertising revenue begin to move away from legacy media like television, magazines, and newspapers. So you can see how all of these things have been growing over time, and as they have gotten larger and larger and more a part of our everyday lives, we begin to be part of this ecosystem. The other thing I want to talk about is why we share. Now, Jonah Berger is a professor at the University of Wharton Business School, wrote a book called Contagious, and some of the ideas he presents in there are things that we have known about: social currency. Why do we share? Because we want people to think a certain way about us, and so on. But one of the key things that he talks about is emotion, is the idea of awe and anger. Think about when you have shared content online. Somebody said something that's really pissed you off, or something that's really made you feel very emotional in some way, and that's usually the thing that has motivated you to pass the content forward. That's really important when you're talking from an advertising perspective, because advertisers are playing on your emotion. The Dear Kitten video is the sweetest, cutest thing you've ever seen, and that's why people share it with other people. The other person I would bring to your attention is Nicholas John, is a professor from Israel, and he wrote a book called The Age of Sharing. And what he talks about in that book is the idea of the language that we use around social media, that Facebook is a community, that we're sharing, right? I'm not passing advertising to you, I'm sharing content with you. It's a very different way to think about those sorts of things. So how we're motivated to share is changing. A few years ago, the attention of the advertising industry was focused on how content was going to be produced and how quickly. That's no longer a problem because the proliferation of branded content firms and the widespread use of programmatic ad buying. Marketers and publishers have become more adept at managing and analyzing data. They've made the mobile space a mobile mall. Now the back end has become manageable. The attention has shifted to finding the most effective form of selling and message distribution, and that's influencers and aggregated influencers. As online interactions demanded more personal, more emotional connection, advertisers turned to influencers to sell their products. So these were just a couple I took from Forbes' top influencers, and they maintain a list of the leading influencers. But influencers provide advertisers with significant advantages. First, influencers created relationships, trusting, authentic relationships with their followers, which make them perfect brand ambassadors. Second, initially used simply as mouthpieces, today they are also used as content producers and as part of integrated message network systems. This level of customization enables higher engagement levels than other digital platforms. Think about that for just a minute. The influencer is the ad. Content can be as simple as a product review or as complex as multi-platform, fully integrated campaigns where the influencer and brand work together to create a sales message that works for both parties. Third, influencers offer a two-way conversation. Consumers might interact with a brand, but they are far more likely to have a conversation with one of their favorite YouTubers. And unlike most brands, influencers are entertaining and relatable. They evoke emotion and have a relationship with the visitor on the channel, and the audience has opted in to get the message. Check, 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 check. You decided that you wanted to engage with this person, whether or not you know they're selling something to you. Finally, they provide quantifiable results, both in terms of engagement as well as how successful the influencer has been in turning viewers into brand advocates, the goal of the vast majority of these campaigns. So what Forbes does, in addition to keeping track of who the most visible influencers are, they do this by vertical, by area, so pets and parenting and beauty and so on. Companies do this as well, and I just picked this company. It's a Spanish company, right? They develop their own stable of influencers that they work with. And when people think of influencers, they typically think of people with very large followings, but that isn't necessarily the only kind of influencer that is going to be of value to a marketer. So broadly, there are thousands of influencers ranging from a few hundred followers to many millions of followers. Influencers with a few hundred followers could be beneficial to advertisers if their followers are loyal and passionate in relationship to a particular product niche. So say you're an expert on fly fishing. Not a lot of people go fly fishing, but if you know everything you need to know about fly fishing, you could become very valuable to somebody who sells those sorts of products. So influencers like Beyonce or Lady Gaga provide loyalty as well as media tonnage. So the thinking goes, if one influencer is good, then 2 or 10 or 20 is better. So that if you ask advertisers how many influencers they use for a particular campaign, that big bar there, 52%, they use 10 to 25 influencers on a campaign, and not just one. And again, here too, I picked the beauty vertical, and I'm sorry you can't see those numbers, but if you aggregate all those beauty influencers, you can reach 125 million people just through those 10 influencers. That's a lot of media exposure. This is for a particular company called Collectedly that did a campaign with Sephora. So they reached out to influencers who created all this cute little content you see in the corner. And over the course of a week, they had 785,000 engagements, 460,000 likes, and 65 million earned media. So this is what I was talking about in terms of paid, owned, and earned. So yes, they paid the influencers, but not the kind of money they would have paid to have a commercial on network television. And even an ad on network television wouldn't have reached 65 million people. Within the agency itself, they have 65,000 influencers that they work with who over the course of a week, put out 72 million communications. So those are the possibilities in terms of reaching customers. This is another company called Tidal, and they did a campaign for Banana Republic. And a lot of this can be done very easily for advertisers because it can all be done online. The influencer contacts the agency, they say, I can reach this many people. The Banana Republic says, great, we'll send this to you. They ship the dresses off to them, they post it online, and it's all done all done through a website. I just wanted to show you some other examples, and just to show you how rampant these influencer networks are. This is one called Hyper that says they have information on every single influencer on the planet. This is one, Olapic, which I haven't done a lot of work on, but if somebody's looking for a project, this would be a good one. This is an influencer site that aggregates user-generated content and then resells it to advertisers. This happens to be, Amazon has a program. They have an influencer program. Again, the same sort of verticals that, that Forbes has as well. And this group is Social Chain, and I bring this to your attention because they've been around sort of longer than anybody else have. In the case of influencers, rather than an agency working behind them, they coordinate tweets in order to amplify communications. Visitors to the site think they're reading a post from someone they follow, and they are, but the tweet has been boosted by interconnected influencers to bring information to the fore. Social Chain, a UK firm that got attention in a BuzzFeed article in 2015 and a BBC radio documentary last year, claims they can turn anything into a trending topic. So things that you see on Twitter that you think are organically trending are in fact have been influenced by a marketer. So what are the consequences of this kind of advertising? Some of this has to do with going back to my old life, right? Regulation is lax or non-existent. And I talked to people at the FTC, and really they don't have the funding and they don't have the ability to be able to follow up on this. But even in one study, 37% of advertisers were not in compliance with FTC regulations as it relates to this. Now, that would have been one thing in the television age. You would have been able to track it. But 37,000 out of 12,000 campaigns, The ability to be able to track that is almost impossible, and people know it. What's also really interesting is they asked marketers if they require their influencers to let them know that that they are sponsored content, and 88% of advertisers will say that they do, but then they say, do you know what the FTC disclosure guidelines are? Most of them don't. So while they say they require them to do it, they don't tell them, and they can't tell them what they are. This is what they are, and I obviously won't read this to all of you, but the requirement is, for instance, on Instagram, that somebody write #sponsored or #ad or #paid, which really #ad, like, I'm not sure that that's really particularly helpful. Pull Lady Gaga again. This was a post from Lady Gaga. She's obviously selling clothes that were designed by her friend, but there is nothing in here that says anything about the fact that it is sponsored or advertising or paid for. So there's no longer this wall between church and state, and what I want to really highlight here is this first point, which is the use of native advertising negatively affects media outlets when readers know it is sponsored content, influences perceptions of the real news. So it's not the advertisers that are being denigrated by the use of the native advertising, it's the publications that get slammed when readers find out that they've been engaging with native advertising. I talk about this as native confusion, and again, this ties into all of the issues we have around fake news right now. So in terms of legacy media, newspapers are dying, bad news, Bertha here. Magazines are on life support, and television, people still spend a lot of time watching live television, and it may be holding on. But we have to figure out if the money is not coming from advertising, and the agreement has been that we would engage with advertising in order to be able to get free media content, that it's got to come from somewhere, and it's going to come from you. And if you haven't started to feel this, I know we certainly feel this. You pay for your Spotify, you pay for Hulu, you pay for Netflix, and all of those things start to add up over time. But you're thinking it's $10 here, it's $10 there. And I was talking about that a while ago, but there's now actually numbers to show this, right? The increased numbers of subscribers for Netflix and Amazon and Spotify and Dropbox and New York Times and so on. So I want to leave you with a couple of final thoughts. We already know that most people do not recognize branded content. We can, for now, make an educated guess that they do not realize that content is being disseminated to hundreds of influencers simultaneously, nor do they understand that topics and products are trending because of manipulation, rather than being of organic interest. As more of this process is automated and people, living, breathing, thoughtful human beings, are taken out of the process, the more abuse we are likely to see or not see. Regulation is necessary to safeguard readers against corporate marketers. We live in a new media environment, and regulations need to catch up to the technology, not only to protect consumers, but to protect the integrity of publications whose credibility is sorely affected by these practices. We must also question what happens in societies where information is only available to those who can afford to pay for it, which seems to be the direction we are heading. These are not easy questions, but ones I believe we need to address. Our very democracies may depend on it. Thank you. Sorry to be so depressing. We can make it a little lighter.
Thanks so much. Now we have some time to answer questions that you can present to Dr. Einstein, who is the first. Qui vol fer alguna pregunta? Who is going to start? At the back of the room, we have the first, and I hope it's not the last.
Oh, there we go. Hi. Hi, Mara. I love your lecture. It was really fun. I have a question regarding influencer marketing. Um, been a growing trend, especially on the YouTube community, of people losing subscribers massively because someone finds out they're lying about something or somebody digs up something about their past. How does this move on like in the future? How do companies choose their influencers now that an influencer can in one day lose their following like in a heartbeat?
Well, it's really interesting because I like to compare this. Thank you for your question. I like to compare this to when I worked in advertising. And in the old days, I used to work on the Miller account. And before we ever put somebody into an ad, we did a background check on everybody. And just for those purposes, because what that person was going to then rub off onto your brand. And I'll tell you a story, a really terrible story. Actually, the last commercial I ever worked on was an ad called Football Wives. And so instead of actually using the football player, so this was for Miller Beer, and we always use sports figures for that. And so we always would look into the sports figures because we wanted to make sure everything was okay. But we were using the wives in the ad, and somebody, thankfully not me, stupidly did not look into the wives' backgrounds. Well, one of them was walking in front of me, and while we're working on the ad, turns to the other one and tells her she's pregnant. Now, the last thing we need is for somebody to find out we have a pregnant woman doing an alcohol ad. But we're down there doing the shoot. Then we find out that the husband of another one has been picked up on a DWI, on a drinking charge, while he's driving. So we shoot the commercial, then we have to reshoot we have to cut it, so those two women are cut out of the ad so people don't see it. So the importance, and I tell you that story to tell you, the importance of understanding who is the face of your ad is paramount for advertisers. And I don't think that they are thinking about it within the context of the social media space because of what I was talking about in terms of they're willing to hope that that doesn't happen on the belief that having that one-to-one connection with people is more important in terms of the sales issue. But to the point about YouTubers, because there's so many, if I lose one, it's not my problem. The problem becomes, it hurts the worker, right? It hurts the YouTube worker. It doesn't hurt the marketer, ultimately, because it'll only fall within a small part of the audience. Thanks for the question.
Thank you. More questions? One more.
Sorry, still about, thank you for your lecture.
Sure.
Sorry. And I wanted to make a question also about YouTube, especially about the adpocalypse that happened 2 years ago, more or less, and about all the advertisers that pulled away from YouTube. And now they're coming back, but it doesn't seem to be regulated. So where are we headed exactly?
Yeah.
Because you talked about the need of regulations, but where are we now headed?
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. It's not an easy question, and it's something that I fight for. I haven't talked about it in terms of YouTube, but I have in terms of Facebook. If you want, there was a CBC interview that I did right after Mark Zuckerberg testified in front of Congress. And I don't know if any of you had a chance to watch that, but it was the biggest fiasco I've ever seen. I mean, one of the questions that they asked him was, you know, do you follow people on sites other than Facebook? And his response was, I will have to check with my people. Now, we all know that Facebook is following us on any site that has the little Facebook. We all know that Facebook is following us on every site that has the little Facebook icon if we're logged into Facebook, right? No, I'm all of a sudden seeing faces like, oh, really? Yeah, really. So if you don't log out of Facebook, Facebook is following you on every site that has the little icon on it, okay? I have said at the end of the book, and I have also written and talked about it since then, that Facebook is the oil baron, similar to the oil barons of the early 1900s in the United States, and those were broken up for antitrust, and Facebook should be broken up for antitrust as well. Google should also be broken up for antitrust, and obviously YouTube is part of Google. I have a lot of concerns about it, but some of my biggest issues is thinking about this. Most of the money most of the advertising dollars are coming out of television and moving into digital, right? Or newspapers and magazines, and moving into the digital space. And it's going to two places, Google and Facebook. I think have close to 60% of all advertising dollars online is Facebook and Google. How much content does Google and Facebook make? Anybody? Zero. They make no content, and yet they're making all of the money in the online space. And so and this is an issue that I have, and I know this isn't your question, I'll come back to it, but this is a conversation that I have with my students. They all want to go work in television. Well, that's really great, but if you're not watching television, you're not supporting television, you're not paying for television, who do you think is going to pay your salary? And particularly if you're talking about all of that money going into Facebook and Google. Now, in terms of YouTube and regulation and so on, I think that this has got to be a bigger cry, and people have to make more of an issue out of it. Europe is far ahead of the United States when it comes to that. The right to be forgotten exists here and does not exist in the United States. The tracking of us and our data. There's a new book out called Anti-Social Media by Siva Vayahananthan. I can never pronounce his last name correctly, but it's all about Facebook. And the reason why Facebook allowed the Russian ads to appear and to allow people to be segmented, even using racial segmentation, is because they have no motivation not to. And I think the only thing that will stop them is regulation, because their entire revenue stream is based on advertising. They don't make money any way other than advertising. And so, unless the government is going to say to them, you've got to stop this, it's not going to. And I think for right now, as long as Ajit Pai is the head of the FCC and whose name, who will not be spoken, is in the White House, I didn't vote for him. I don't think we have a lot, but if some of your graduate students are looking for topics to explore, I say make this a priority. It does. It makes me want to cry, because I think we are wasting an awful lot of our time in these social spaces. We are not being paid for our data. We are not being paid for our labor, and it's all to the benefit of two companies. Even the advertisers aren't really happy about it. It's really interesting. Unilever just recently said that they were going to start pulling their money out of the online space because they didn't believe that people were actually seeing their ads or engaging with their advertising as much as they hoped. So that's another possibility of a way to turn this around, is to get advertisers to realize that this is not an effective way for them to be selling their products. Because I'm not convinced it is. I'm not. Did I do okay?
An interesting issue. More questions? Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
You have been underlying key issues in the world of advertising and in digital times. Huh? You know, in my past life, I was also a regulator. I was the president of the Catalan FCC. Yes. That found 10 years ago. And it's so difficult to establish a regulation in the digital world, trying to answer in favor of the public interest. And 10 years later, I realize that it's much more difficult because the explosion of the social networks is really difficult, really difficult. But some level of regulation is needed in order to promote the public interest.
But I mean, that's what I was talking about in terms of the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, is the organization that regulates this within the United States. And when I talked to them in researching the book, first of all, they didn't have a specific definition for native advertising. So, you know, even they haven't figured out what this is. And it's like, well, you know, you're the people that are regulating this. You guys need to figure this out and figure it out soon. On the other hand, and really, if you think about this, and this is what I was trying to say in the slide toward the end, it wasn't that long ago, we're talking about the 1980s, when the media landscape was a couple of television networks, a couple of newspapers, maybe 100 magazines or something like that, but all things that could be assessed and regulated and tracked. And we can't do that in the online space. And in particular, where it gets really dangerous, when we certainly saw this in terms of the elections in the United States, is because the audience can be so finely targeted down to the individual, the content, which I didn't even talk about much at all here, the content itself can be created for individual readers. And so I don't know what you're seeing, and you don't know what I'm seeing. And so in the traditional political space, what would happen is, say when George Bush was running, if I wanted to know what George Bush was doing, I'd get my name onto a direct mail list, and I'd start finding out what they were sending out to his followers. And then I could respond with a competing message. I don't know, and none of us know, what all those people who were targeted by Cambridge Analytica saw in terms of an advertising message online. So it becomes almost impossible as a marketer to work against what you don't even know is out there and can't know what's out there because it's happening in such small, individually defined spaces.
Thank you so much. Thanks. And now you are going to start your first class. Ara començareu a les primeres sessions. Aquí darrere, en teoria, han de sortir les aules, han de salir el número de las aulas donde empezaréis la primera sesión. Me parece que están en... no sé si podéis ver algo. Para mí es casi imposible, pero yo tengo una cierta edad ya. Pero saldrá cada máster y cada aula. A continuación hay las clases. Esto aún es más difícil. Bueno, muchas gracias y espero que tengáis un curso muy interesante.